Who-dats. Welcome to the podcast you've been waiting for. Great perspective and exclusive interviews.
It's a hard job for those guys because it's happening fast.
The kind of Saints insight and fun commentary you won't get anywhere else.
We've got plenty of technology to speed things up.
It's time to kick off your Been There, Done That Saints podcast, where we hand it off to our host, Mike Nabors, and Super Bowl winning linebacker, Scott Shanle.
Proud of these guys.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's another Been There, Done That podcast. I am Mike Nabors. It's time to take roll. Justin Thomas, are you here? Scott Shanle, are you here?
Present.
And Scott, you know what? They just released the preseason schedule. And does anybody get excited about that? Because frankly, to me, that's a good sign that football, it's a little bit closer.
Yeah, I think as players, you check those games out. Even if you're a starter and you're not going to play a whole lot, it's interesting to see, especially, 2 home games, 2 away games, and you go through the rigors of training camp. You kind of it's a little break. You get on the first 2 flights of the year, and you get to go to see what city you go to for the preseason. So yeah, guys like to check out the preseason games.
Yeah, the schedule for the Saints: a home date against Minnesota, then they're going to go on the road against the LA Chargers, and then up to New York. So you're going coast to coast there for some preseason action, then back home to finish up the preseason schedule with the Miami Dolphins in kind of a meaningless game unless you're a backup linebacker trying to make the team. But you know what, guys? We're excited about this podcast because we have yet another great guest, a mainstay in the Sean Payton era, started so many games that were meaningful. We're talking offensive lineman Jon Stinchcomb, one of the best interviews in a locker room full of great interviews. So he's going to talk about really the perspective of making the transition from the Jim Haslett era to the Sean Payton era, what he's up to these days. We're kind of bust on him about what his Georgia Bulldogs have been through recently, and we're going to have more likely. So you guys stick around for Jon Stinchcomb. But you know what, Scott, I think what we try to do in this podcast is obviously bring in great guests and have great Saints stories and perspective, but also great perspective from you. I heard an interview recently, and they were talking about the locker room in the NFL. And I know every locker room is different, and the good ones are more likely with successful teams because you have that great chemistry. But they were talking about how often the locker room kind of polices itself if there's a little skirmish or, a little trash talking. The coaches aren't often there. It's unusual to have coaches walk through that often, and that was that particular locker room. How was it in the Sean Payton era? Did he walk through there a lot? Did the assistants walk through there a lot? How was it?
Well, based on where their offices were, they would come down the steps, and so they would have to cross through the front of the locker room to get to the team meeting area. So those guys would come through, but those guys really never hung out a lot. And Coach Payton, everybody kind of knew when Coach Payton walked through because he was either he'd either walk through quickly or he had one player at the front of the locker room he wanted to mess with for a little bit, and everybody got a chuckle out of that. But we really never saw the coaches in the locker room a whole lot. The old saying that good or great teams are led by great coaches, championship teams are led by the players. That was the case for us. Guys policed the locker room, and I think a lot of leadership and leaders emerged in that locker room because, hey, there's fights in every practice. There's skirmishes, there's issues, but it never carried over to the locker room. We had a great locker room as far as guys getting along and policing that thing.
We're going to get to Jon Stinchcomb, an extended interview with him, some great Saints stories and perspective. But before we do that, you mentioned Sean Payton kind of walking through and picking out a guy. Did he pick different guys? Was there one guy he picked out more than another, or how'd that work?
Well, it was always the guys towards the front of the locker room. And I can remember the punters and kickers sat up there, so automatically they would probably get something said to him. Reggie and Pierre, the running backs were towards the front by the door, and then the linebackers. So Vilma, his locker was right there, and no coach could ever miss him. So the linebackers and the running backs and the specialists usually got messed with by Coach Payton if he walked through and had something to say for that day.
And I was in that locker room a lot, so the DBs and the offensive linemen and kind of the quarterbacks were on the other side, so they were safe for the most part.
They were safe. They were tight corner. Coach Payton decided to change it up and come through the training room doors back by them. Now they were put on notice a little bit, and he could catch them off guard with kind of a sneak attack back there.
All right, let's don't waste any more time. Let's bring in our guest. He is a faithful Georgia Bulldog, a 4-year starter at Georgia, a second-round pick for the New Orleans Saints back in 2003. He started 86 straight games for the Saints over 5 seasons, and the Super Bowl season was big. He won a Super Bowl, he was a Pro Bowler, and he was the Saints Man of the Year. We welcome in Jon Stinchcomb.
What's up, fellas?
Welcome aboard. You know what? I hate to throw you, kind of a hard one off the bat, but before I ask you about how are you doing and some perspective on your old days, John, it's been tough for you lately. I mean, Georgia losing Alabama, the no call for the Saints. So what was tougher for you in this past football season?
Wow, you can start with the low blows.
Yeah.
Somewhere Roman Harper's smiling.
Both were terrible, honestly. What a bad way, 2 years running for the Saints to end a season. And then same thing for Georgia, where you beat the best team or one of the best teams in the country in Alabama for 59 straight minutes and then come up short against their backup quarterback. So 2 years in a row for both of my teams to end on some pretty sour notes. I just really appreciate you opening with that. Really, let's get on the right foot. You know what I mean, Mike?
John, we bring the heat early. You're a pro. You're used to that, right?
I guess. Sheesh. It's like Greg Williams in preseason game number 1.
Maybe we should start this again, Scott. What do you think?
Yeah.
John, seriously, life after football for you. You were always a very cerebral professional, always great with the media, always knew what to say, always a pro's pro. How has life been for you since you left New Orleans?
Well, it's been a real struggle. I'm destitute, living in a gutter, but found somebody's computer to borrow to come on the show today. No, life is good, man. The transition is always a challenge for guys. You try to figure out, you spend most of your life in playing sports, and for 10 years postgraduate college, I became really good at getting in the way for 3 or 4 seconds at a time. And as it turns out, that doesn't translate to many other fields very well. But got involved with a nonprofit, been doing some character development and small group mentorship with high school kids, which has been awesome. Still training offensive linemen as they get ready for their draft and pro day. So staying connected to the game there and giving back. And got my real estate license and doing real estate out here in Georgia. So I like to juggle.
Sounds like you stay busy, John. The one thing I'm going to stick with a word you used in there, transition. I think the cool thing about this podcast that Mike and I are able to do is capturing kind of the Coach Payton era, which is continuing to go on, which is rare in the NFL. So we have a lot of years to talk about. But I want to talk about the transition from the Coach Haslett era to the Sean Payton era. And you were a part of that. What was the biggest thing you noticed, the difference in their styles that maybe you either thought we could have success right away in 06, or maybe things that you were kind of concerned about from the coaching change?
It was about as dramatic a change as you could possibly have in an organization. And I think if you talk to Lance Moore or Will Smith, Charles Grant, there's only a handful of guys that were involved in under both regimes, and to see how much they had to come in and change the culture of the team more than anything. I mean, you look at rosters, and there was unbelievable talent under Haslett. It was just, Haslett was a former player, and I think he gave guys a lot of leniency and a lot of rope, and it ended up biting him because we weren't able to control ourselves and appreciate the opportunity that was given us to treat it as professionals and take care of your business and show up on Sunday and perform. And in exchange, what he got was a team full of guys that were relatively selfish and abused the liberties that he extended. So when Coach Payton came in, you look at the roster turnover, and it was pretty remarkable. It was staggering to see how many guys, seasoned vets, young guys that had some struggles early on, mainly off the field, but had talent that they were willing to part ways with to change the entire culture. And candidly, it was needed. It was something that, I love the game of football, always have, and I really didn't feel like I fit in with the group of characters that we had in that locker room for the first 3 years of my career in New Orleans. I tell people I played for the Saints my entire career, but 2 different teams, just because of the difference that existed in the locker room and from the coaching staff. So obviously you were a part of a good percentage of that first training camp there in Millsaps, but Joe Vitt and Coach Payton get a good laugh about how hard it was. I still don't think it's all that funny, and I think that definitely took years off my life that I'll never get back.
Hey, that's the truth. That training camp, you have to go through it to do it justice. But my comment, and I've never told guys like you this, but I think the reason we had so much success is because guys like you and Will Smith and John Carney, the holdovers from the Haslett regime, were open. They were open to change and open to a new coaching staff, and that's rare. A lot of times you find guys from previous regimes that are kind of stubborn, they pout, they question everything, and there was none of that. And I think we were all bought in early in 06, and that's a credit to you guys. So,
well, Scott, if you had any beef with it, you were shipped off pretty quick.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Coach Payton let it be known that it was a changing of the guard. That's for sure. I have a question for you, John, is I haven't really asked anybody this as far as one-on-one type things with players that they went against in the league, but just seeing the Cowboys' DeMarcus Lawrence, he signed a new deal, $20 million a year is what defensive ends are making now. Who was the best defensive end you played against? Who was the hardest guy to block that you just knew it was going to be all-day sucker every time you played against him?
Well, you talk about all-day suckers. For me, it was Julius Peppers. I mean, in conference, you're guaranteed to see him twice a year. There are guys that are probably a little more scary in the pass game in certain situations. John Abraham is one of those guys where if it's a 2-minute drill or it's, 3rd and long, I don't want to look across and see him. But he's not one of those guys that's going to scare you all game long. There's certain situations you don't want to be in against him. Julius Peppers, when he wanted to play, I know the first play I had against him, it was the 3rd game I'm starting at right tackle, and we've got all this game plan of how we're going to eliminate him from the game. So the first play out of the gates is a play-action pass away from him. We're going to boot away. So the tight end gets a chip. I can come off the ball full steam. The running back's going to bump him on his way out. Then the quarterback's going to roll away. So we're going to let him know, hey, early on, we've got this plan for you. And we execute it perfectly. The tight end on his way out, blasts him. I come off the ball like it's goal line, low and hard. The running back gets a little shot on his ribs. Well, boot out. Drew hits the tight end who catches the ball and is working his way up the opposite sideline from me. And who's in on the tackle but Julius Peppers? And it was at that point that I knew I was going to have my hands full for quite a few years to come.
John, I hope we're still talking after that opening question, but I'll be easier moving forward here. I want to talk about your early days. Obviously, you grew up in Georgia. You were a 4-year starter. Your big brother, was an All-American at Georgia, Matt, who's going to the College Football Hall of Fame. Were you always going to go to Georgia in recruiting? Did you think about other schools? What was that process like coming out of high school?
Well, I thought about a lot of other schools. It's quite a unique opportunity, and I was grateful for it to be able to pretty much choose wherever you want to go to school. And I didn't want to just go to Georgia because my brother went there. But it's probably of note that as I was looking, my mom told me, she said, you can look at whatever school you want to, son, but I'm only going to drive you to Athens. And so I thought, well, that's good to know. And she was serious. I went to a spring game at Florida, and Auburn and Clemson both were real contenders for me. I wanted to stay somewhat close to home and play some good football with some good academics. And at the end of the day, it was just the right school for me. But I looked around, and every school I went to, I'd always compare back to the University of Georgia, and it just made too much sense to go there to even, seriously look anywhere else.
Big brothers can be tough. Big brothers can be mentors. Your big brother, obviously, I'm sure taught you a lot. Was he tough on you? What was the relationship like growing up in a household with a big brother who was so good? And then obviously you became a good player too.
Well, I was always like the runt of the neighborhood. So, I mean, the youngest kid of all the ones who were playing outside. And I remember many times where you're trying to catch up in football or basketball and you're getting beat up because everybody doesn't want the young kid, tagging along, or, sooner or later they'd force me to go inside in tears and play dolls with the lone girl of the neighborhood. But it makes you tough, man. So Matt and I didn't really get close until I want to say college. That I redshirted my first year, and he was we played the same position. So I'm behind Matt's at one tackle, Chris Terry, another first-round draft pick at the other tackle for the University of Georgia, learning behind them. And that semester, I graduated high school early and early enrolled at Georgia. So for that year, just to spend with him, we got a lot closer. It kind of changed from the big brother, little brother, younger brother to just good friends. And I'm grateful for that year because it's extended on through our adulthood.
Jon, I asked Harp this a few weeks ago when we had him on here, and I know players hate looking back in the past. If there was one play, maybe not one play, one game or one season that you could redo in your NFL career, do you have something in mind?
Oh man, Shanle, I'm that guy who I remember pretty much every sack I gave up.
Yeah.
I can remember the bad plays that I have so much easier.
Oh, yeah.
Folks will talk about games that we have, and I think I barely remember that one.
Yeah.
But my screw ups will still haunt me. So that first NFC Championship in Chicago, we were struggling, man. We offensively weren't playing very well. One of our first touchdowns, Reggie's got that long run and ends up kind of taunting Urlacher and Riggs as he's running away from him. Well, it was not the best game for that scenario. It only got colder. It was loud. Yeah. We weren't playing great. So we're trying to mount a comeback and going up against a guy named Adewale Ogunleye.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And he's got, for real. Well, it's a memorable name. And he's got one go-to move, and I'd practiced it all week of how I'm going to stop it. And he's going to come back inside, and I'm going to all these different things. Well, 3/4 of the game, no problem. I've stopped it pretty successfully, and we're trying to make this comeback. Anyway, here it comes. He gets me on it. I try to spin. It's a sack, fumble, turnover, nail in the coffin. Oh, man, it was such a brutal play. So pretty much the last quarter of the season that you have 9 months to think about until you play another real game. And I still think about that one. So y'all are 2 for 2 of bringing up some really positive memories. It's very healthy.
Let me ask you about I thought that was a very interesting comment you had at the beginning of the podcast, that you played for the Saints, but for 2 different teams. And I know, you came into the league as a second-round pick, and you'd always been a star at Georgia, and you wanted to contribute right away. You had to buy your time. Then you felt like you were ready, and then you had the injury. You do preseason telecasts. You know the drill, how you meet with Coach Payton, and he kind of gives you, some good stories and some good preview of what the game will be. I remember meeting with Coach Payton before his first game back in 2006, and he's talking to Tim Brando and I about the roster and kind of breaking it down. And he really didn't know what he had with that offensive line. I felt like, Jeff Fain was a proven guy that came in, and he liked your experience, but there were a lot of question marks in that offensive line, like there were a lot of question marks about that football team in 2006. How did that offensive line come together so quickly that year?
That's a great question. I mean, they lost sleep over that offensive line. They let Wayne Gandy go. They moved over Jamal Brown. You still got Fain, but then you've got some low round draft pick from Bloomsburg that might start, and his technique is terrible. You've got a right tackle who's coming off a patella tendon rupture who misses half the first week of training camp because his got a grapefruit size worth of swelling in his knee. I mean, between Coach Payton and Coach Marone, they're sitting there going, we might not have the group we need, but it was that kind of typified our camp. I mean, Drew hadn't thrown a pass over 6 yards all preseason. I mean, that's slight exaggeration, but not by much. And you got a patchwork offensive line that is unproven and hasn't worked together very well. But I think what they succeeded in doing was melding us together as a unit. We were able to complement one another and develop. I think Coach Marone is a phenomenal offensive line coach and was able to create some synergy amongst us as we developed as young players. And really, it complement one another and come along and develop and have some really good careers across that front.
One of those guys that was on that team back in 06 was a rookie out of Northwestern by the name of Zach Strief. And I know you guys are still friends to this day, and you mentored him in so many ways. We had him on our inaugural Been There, Done That podcast, and we like to ask kind of off-the-wall questions at the end. Yeah, they're coming, John. But one of them was to Zach Strief. The show Big Brother, Ricky Williams was on that show. We asked Zach Strief, out of all his teammates in New Orleans and his tenure, who would be the worst on Big Brother? Here's what he had to say.
I think Stinchcomb would be lousy because he's too nice, right? But then he's also he's a big prank guy, so maybe that factors in for him.
All right, before your rebuttal to that, would you A, be bad on Big Brother, and B, just talk about Zach Strief and your relationship and what that means to you to this day?
Oh, man, it's so good. I want you to send me that sound bite of him saying I'm too nice. He complains that I'd just torment him endlessly. But I feel like, there's a little bit of ego to all of us, right? But you got a room full of alpha males. I think we all feel like we do great on pretty much any game show you threw us on. And he knows that. I mean, he's still looking for ways to get me back for when I boxed up his locker and put Detroit Lions on it. And he came into work when he'd been traded.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Every little chance he gets to get a little jab back, he tries to take it. It's the kind of person he is, a little bit petty.
Wow, that's a great prank. I'm just learning this today. You learn something new every day, and here we are years later. I'm learning you got Strief. Maybe that's why Strief's a little bit bitter towards you on some level. I don't know. He didn't get over it.
Never.
This is the chance to build Stinch back up question. We're gonna stay positive on this one. One of my favorite pictures in the facility, it's in the practice facility, is of our line of the you guys in 09 when we won the Super Bowl. Because to me, obviously we had a great quarterback, we had great running backs. Shockey was a character, but to me, I don't think we win a Super Bowl without you guys as an offensive line. You guys were outstanding all year. You paved the way for us to get there. Obviously, you guys play underappreciated position, but you guys were outstanding. Do you recall in the 09 season, whether it was in the season, training camp, maybe it was in OTAs, do you recall thinking, wow, we have something pretty special here with this group and we got a chance?
Well, I think throughout that tenure with that group, I mean, you look at that picture and they're all Pro Bowlers. Jermon, Carl, Goody, Jari, and me, and then Strief is the sixth, who goes on to have a 12-year career and arguably one of the best right tackles during his tenure. Yes, I'm giving him a little love in return, but that group was elite. And here's what makes it awesome, Scott. And you could probably relate with your position group room, is that we're close. We still text. Yeah. We still, talk about the mythical trip that we're all going to take together and get everyone back together. But we got along really well. And just like brothers, I mean, we argue and we'd fight, but at the end of the day, we love one another. And that translates to the football field. And, most folks have this perception that you can create that environment in college, but it doesn't exist in the NFL. And I think that group proves that it can very much exist in the NFL and thrive. And when you have it, special things happen.
I agree 100%. I mean, you talk about our room, and I saw the relationship you guys have and obviously still have. It makes it so special because it's rare. It's rare in the NFL. It's rare in pro sports to have that. And we were lucky to play and win with guys that we loved, that we cared about. But I just remember that season, I remember thinking we were going to be pretty good. We made some key acquisitions in the offseason, but when we went up to Philadelphia, I think it was week 3 maybe, and we beat the heck out of the Eagles, who were supposed to be a pretty good team. I mean, we stomped them, and I thought we have a chance to be really good this year. We started off 4-0. We beat the Giants, and I just remember thinking, this is our time. It was 3 years removed from the 2006 NFC Championship loss, and I thought, this is our year to do it if it's ever to be done.
I'm with you. Yeah, we definitely. I think early on in the season, you had a special feel. You know, you can get a sense for it in the off season. You can get a little more of an inkling in preseason, but until you strap it up and it's a regular season game, it's against one of the better teams that's expected to play in the playoffs, you're not exactly sure what you got. And I agree. Early on in that season, you realized and you could recognize pretty quickly that we had something special and we could make a real run at things. I'm with you.
You know, you talk about something special, John. Is it hard to believe this is the 10-year anniversary of the Super Bowl season? Does it seem like 10 years? Has it gone by fast? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think the years definitely go by fast. When you come back and you see some of the guys you've played with and see the gray hairs and the bad bodies, it's easy to realize it's been almost a decade. But, you know, it seems to fly by, honestly. I think the years definitely click off pretty quick.
All right, no more tough questions. Well, actually, we have 3 more. Justin, you know what time it is. All right, to the man who could answer any question when it came to his days as a player from the media, this is more likely 3 hypotheticals for Jon Stinchcomb, the likes of Roman Harper, Marcus Colston even, Lance Moore, and we've had several guests so far. They've survived it, so I know you can. More likely, number 1, you talked about a lot of your teammates. If you were stranded on an island and you could only have one of your former offensive linemen with the New Orleans Saints to be on that island to survive together with, who would it be?
Oh, man. Oh, what a brutal question. There's so many good ones. And I can only choose one. And this is a survival situation.
Survive. That's the key. Stinch, is not the nice guy that you can just have conversation with the whole time. Who's going to help you survive on this island?
Wow. And who would you not want to before you actually die of natural causes? Man, that is quite the challenge. I'm gonna go old school on you. And this is predates probably even you, Scott. I'm going to go with Ben Archibald.
Wow.
Who he goes on to the Canadian Football League, was Offensive Lineman of the Year, but he's sharp and he's a smart guy, pretty tactical, and we probably wouldn't want to kill each other before the elements would have gotten us. I would say, someone along the lines. So here's my thought process: you got Streif. Well, he's a know-it-all. The guy, you asked him at one point, how much does a helicopter cost, and he's giving you an actual number. You know what I mean? We're starting to question whether or not he knows some stuff that he thinks he knows. We're probably going to eat something that's not really edible, and we die because of it. You know what I mean? So definitely not Streif. Jari and Carl, their consumption of all of our supplies is going to run us down. I could go with Goody, maybe Bushrod. Those are some options.
Shanle, if you had to pick one former offensive lineman, I'll get you in the mix. Who would it be?
Oh, I thought you were going to give me a linebacker.
I'll give you somebody on defense. Any defense.
Because I'm not in the room enough with those guys to know. I'm going with, no doubt about this, it's Scott Fujita. This guy could live off the land for as long as you need him to, and I'm sticking by his side.
You know what's funny about that is I did this thing in training camp every 4 years with the Olympics, and I would take a kind of an unscientific poll around the locker room: who would make the best Olympian? And the first year, Fujita won by a landslide when I did it. And you know how competitive Breeze is. And I took Breeze off the side and I said, hey, I'm doing this poll. Who would you vote for? Who do you think's winning? And Breeze looked at me and he said, is it me? And I said, no, it's Fujita. And the competitor in Drew Brees was so upset. The only time that he maybe had been more upset is when Jimmy Graham edged him out 4 years later for that honor. So that's kind of my survivor. All right, number 2, and more likely. We don't have a lot of rehearsal for this show. If you haven't been able to tell by now, John, we kind of change up these questions a little bit, but I want to get a little serious here. I talked to Zach Streif recently, and he said Terry Malone, his rookie season at Millsaps, took him aside when he thought basically his football career was over after 3 weeks. And he said, you know what? The former Saints assistant coach, he said, you know what, Zach, you're doing good. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're going to be fine. I know we talked about your first couple of years with the New Orleans Saints. Was there a coach? Was there a veteran? More likely, who took you aside, or was there anybody that kind of was a pivotal guy to you for your career moving forward?
Sure. I think I benefited from when I got to New Orleans. Jack Henry was the offensive line coach, and he recognized it was going to be a difficult situation for me. They just signed 3 veteran tackles. Wayne Gandy just got a monster contract to play left tackle, and then 2 veterans and Spencer Falau and Victor Riley to compete for the right tackle spot. So I wasn't walking into the cush, here's an open slate for you to step right in situation. And he took the time early on and then throughout my first couple years to just touch base with me and say, hey, you're developing, keep working on your skills, and just be ready. The opportunity will come. I know, don't get frustrated. Use this as to your advantage. And I tried to take that to heart. So between Coach Henry and early on Spencer Falau, who at the time was a 10, 11-year vet guy, both of them were pretty influential in me not wanting, you come in and when you're a high draft pick, you want that opportunity. You want to contribute to the team. And that wasn't the situation I walked into. So for them to invest in me a little bit and change my perspective and see it almost as an advantage so that when the opportunity did come, that I was even more prepared than day one, I thought was a great advantage for me.
I think those stories are so interesting. Scott, did you have somebody early on in your career take you aside that was meaningful like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was so fortunate. I had great coaches for the entire 10 years I played. I mean, I started off as a rookie with Lovie Smith, one of the best defensive coaches in the game. And I had Gary Gibbs as a linebackers coach. Joe Vitt was obviously instrumental. I played for Joe longer than any other linebacker that he ever coached, and he coached for over 30 years. So to me, if I had to choose me go from maybe a 3 or 4 year NFL career to playing 10 years, I would say it was Gary Gibbs. He was my linebackers coach in Dallas. Gary taught me the mental side of the game. Gary taught me how to watch film, how to anticipate plays, how to basically really just watch film, because I had no idea what I was looking at. I would watch the whole thing as a whole, and he would teach me how to watch it as a piece, really help me slow down the game and understand the NFL and what I need to do. And then Joe took my game to another level when I got to New Orleans, just instilled confidence in me, made me be a better teammate, be accountable. And then lastly, I'd say Greg Williams taught me that it's not all about X's and O's. It's about the mental side of the game. We've all heard the crazy stuff Greg has talked about and said, but that was all just to get you at a different mental state, mind frame. So I was very fortunate to have defensive coaches that along the way.
The second Greg Williams reference in the podcast. Final more likely, Jon Stinchcomb, and we've obviously run the gamut in this podcast. You wore 78 at Georgia. You wore 78 with the New Orleans Saints. More likely, if you could have 78 of anything, what would it be?
Oh, well, that's an off-the-wall question, Mike, and I appreciate that. You do a lot of interviews, and you come across the same questions. That's a first.
Really?
If I could have 78 of anything.
We'll use that for the promo, I guess.
Man.
Did I stump the mighty Jon Stinchcomb?
Literally.
You were never stumped, ever. You always had good answers, always. Always.
Well, now I'm feeling even more pressure.
You taught Streif everything he knows about answering questions, too, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he did show up wanting to talk endlessly. And I'm glad he was able to parlay that into a somewhat decent career, at least the start of one. But if I could have 78 of anything, I just got back from Puerto Rico with my family for spring break, and there was a couple of opportunities that were like once in a lifetime. And we swam in a bioluminescent bay, and as you swim through it, it's like you have the water lights up as the little flagellates or whatever in the water get agitated. And I think back to after our Super Bowl season, I went on a USO tour, and it was once in a lifetime opportunity after the next. So I'd like 78 of those once in a lifetime memories.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I'll go with. 78 more once in a lifetime memories.
See, we began with kind of a dagger, and we end all heartwarming here on the podcast.
There you go.
I feel all warm inside. That's a great answer. Well, listen, Jon, as promised, you were exceptional. You were always great as a player. I'm glad everything is going for you well with the family, with work. We really appreciate you joining us very much.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. I listened to a couple of your podcasts early on. It was, Scott was talking to Marcus, and that's probably the longest I've heard from either one of them. It's good to walk down memory lane a couple more times.
Thank you, Jon. Appreciate it.
All right, fellas. Have a good one.
Great stuff from Jon Stinchcomb. What made him a smart player? He does a lot of research, and I like the fact that he listened to past podcasts and kind of did his homework on what to expect. But, Scott, he wasn't expecting that first question from me. Did I hurt his feelings? Was that bad? Should I avoid that in the future?
No, I think we just caught him off guard. It wasn't those easy layups that he's used to in a normal media sit-down session. So I think anytime you attack a guy with their college, just like Harp, he loves all the talk about Alabama. But obviously Georgia, they've had a chance to end this Alabama reign the last 2 years. So I think we cut Stinch deep right away, and he was bleeding a little bit from that Bulldogs question.
I really like Stinch, so I felt bad about it. But you know what, Harp, if you're listening to this, you weren't bragging when Mike Nabors was the head coach and then Mike Fight and all that. So just remember, it all comes around, my friend. Speaking of coming around, Justin, we know what time it is. A little lanyap time. All right, we're going to give you a little bit extra, as we always do, to finish up this podcast. Justin, I watched your documentary on the rock climber, the mountain climber, and that guy's insane. I give him all the props. I give him all the credit for making it, but I'm going to take your recommendations from now on. That was one of your lanyards in past weeks. What do you have this week?
Oh, man, I feel like there's so many things to talk about. I was going to talk about the AAFL collapsing.
Oof.
I was thinking about talking about Antonio Brown and all his craziness going on, tweeting former players. But actually, over the weekend, my wife and I, we went on a little getaway to Moab, and it's probably one of the most amazing places I've ever been. The scenery is beautiful. We went to 2 national parks out there, did some hikes, and I still can't get over how amazing the geography in the U.S. is. There's so many amazing places, and this was one of those that literally the views took my breath away. It was a lot of fun, and probably one of my favorite vacations.
You know what? I told you this because you do live in Utah. Man, we cross the country in this podcast. Technology is a beautiful thing. But I'm going to check that out. But Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is probably 4 hours from you, maybe 5 hours, that's one of the nicest places in the country. And it's good in the winter, and it's good in the summer. So
that's actually our next trip. We're going to go to Yellowstone and stop at Jackson Hole. So,
it's tremendous. You'll enjoy it. Justin Thomas always bringing us something different. Mr. Shanle, what do you have lanyap-wise this week?
I took the family, young kids, wife, the town. We went and saw the Shazam movie this week, DC, and we've seen a lot of the DC movies. And I'll tell you what, it was remarkable. They did a great job making it. The kids, they got out of the movie and they said there were no boring parts in that whole movie. I was entertained from beginning to end. And that's a 2-hour movie, and my kids don't sit still. So it was an outstanding movie. They did a great job adding some comic relief in there with the normal DC thing. So outstanding movie. I definitely recommend if you've seen the Spider-Mans and the Hulks and all those other things. Sports wise, I gotta stick with sports. Last night, Texas Tech, Virginia. I was rooting for Texas Tech. I can't help it whether it's right or wrong. I looked at Virginia. When I watched them on TV, I viewed them as the LA Rams. I thought they're not supposed to be there. I don't want them to win. And I thought for sure Texas Tech was going to win it, so all would be right in the universe. But Virginia overcame losing to that 16 seed last year and kind of made a remarkable story out of it. But I couldn't help but feeling like they were my college basketball version of the LA Rams.
We're supposed to get over it at this point, but I just think it's just too hard, Scott. It is.
Oh, absolutely it is. Because you know why, Mike? I think the more obviously I know by going through it, by watching the players up close. And I think the fans, for the most part, they understand how much work goes into being great. And you just don't want to see anybody cheated out of anything. And especially when technology exists to review things and make sure you get it right, you want the right team and the right people to win the championships.
No doubt. You know what? I was rooting for Texas Tech for a different reason. I love their head coach, Chris Beard, because I always root for a guy who's paid his dues. And Chris Beard was on a show recently where they wanted him to list all the places he's coached, and they were going to kind of quiz him on it. And he failed because he's been so many places. He's been in so many colleges, been an assistant for so many different coaches. But I respect that because he really loves what he does. He has a passion. He didn't give up. He kind of stuck it out, and he's reaping the benefits. So I was kind of pulling for him to finish off such a good story. My lanyap, I stay in college basketball. I really, really want to like this guy. I've dealt with him before. He's a pleasure from a media standpoint. But he's kind of like John Calipari. I don't fully trust him. Bruce Pearl, I love you, but please don't get any more NCAA trouble. I like the emotion afterwards, but please, I hope that's real. I hope you're authentic because Bruce Pearl, frankly, we need more people like you in sports that aren't cardboard cutter in terms of press conferences, these robotic guys like Nick Saban. You actually show emotion and you act like you care in a different way from an emotional standpoint. So Bruce Pearl, I don't know, guys. I worry that Auburn's going to be under an NCAA investigation in a matter of months. It kind of follows him. It's a pattern. But he's a breath of fresh air in a sport, college basketball, where you have the one and done. And frankly, we don't know a lot of the players, and there's not much of an identity right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mike. I think you talk about the one and done. Watching Duke and Carolina and Kentucky, it makes it interesting because they have future NBA stars. But that's why, watch Texas Tech. I think all their guys were 2- and 3-star recruits. And there's just something refreshing about that in basketball because there's so much turnover. There's so many guys transferring every year. And you root for those guys who bide their time like they used to have to do and form teams and form championship cultures.
Yeah, I covered that Florida basketball team that won back-to-back titles. And the funny thing is the core of that team were guys whose dads were great athletes. I mean, Joakim Noah, his dad was a great tennis player. You had Al Horford, his dad. You had Torian Green, his dad played in the NBA. So it was kind of a different makeup because you had guys who stayed a long time and they weren't entitled even though their dads were big-time athletes. Well, that wraps up another Been There, Done That podcast. You know what? You can catch us on several platforms from Google to Spotify to Stitcher to iTunes to Podbean. Really like to thank Jon Stinchcomb, always one of my favorite guys. Really deep guy on a lot of levels and brought the kind of perspective we thought he would. For producer Justin Thomas and my co-host Scott Shanle, I'm Mike Nabors. We'll see you next time.